We will be starting in a few minutes. For those of you who are already on the Zoom webinar, you can start to chat with each other, introduce yourself in the chat. That actually will not be monitored, but you can start letting people know that you're there, each other know, and where you're from, because we've got people from all over the world. And we will start in a moment. Hello, this is Cynthia Allen. Very glad to have you here. We've got just a little bit of housekeeping to take care of for the people who are logged in via Zoom. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you can change your view between speaker and gallery view. That's usually in the right-hand corner anyway. Sometimes on iPads or Mac products, things are reversed. You also can chat with each other. We are not monitoring chat, so it is totally something that is between you and the other participants. There will be occasionally a note placed in from our support person to remind you of important details. If you need help from us, technical help, we'll certainly do what we can. You want to submit that via your Q&A through the Q&A section. Hello. This is Cynthia Allen. Very glad to have you here. We've got just a little bit of housekeeping to take care of for the people who are logged in via Zoom. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you can change your view between speaker and gallery. Okay, sorry about that. We had just a little moment of technical error there. And you are here for the first session, which means you're probably going to get a few moments of technical errors. Hopefully we'll work all those out as we go along. So I'm very excited to have you for the very first session of the Feldenkrais Awareness Summit. And let's see, I wanted to say a couple of other things. So Q&A is actually where you will send messages directly to our support people. And they will do their best to help you. We can't promise that we can solve all your technology questions or problems. One thing I will say is if you're having trouble with volume, the most important thing is that you actually turn your own speakers up, because there's so many different variations on systems around the world. The best thing is to turn your own speaker volume up. Okay, I'm going to get ready here to introduce our speaker. Today's interview guest is Jae Gruenke. Jae is going to be joining us from Berlin. And she is, Jae, you'll need to actually make your video live here in a moment.
Yep.
Yes. So Jae is going to be joining us from Berlin, and we're so excited to have her. I'm excited for her to be the first person because, first of all, she's got a lot of experience doing these webinars, so it makes it easier for me to start off with someone with experience. Also, just to tell you a little bit about Jae, she is an expert in running form. She is a Feldenkrais practitioner. She helps beginners to Olympians learn to have not only better form, but to run without pain. And Lavinia, you need to go off. to run without pain. And also she has the Balanced Runner program, which she operates online, as well as offering workshops around the world and seeing people privately. So very glad to have you here today, Jae.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. I'm really thrilled to be here. I would like to begin by telling a story. And it's a story that I think will sound familiar to a lot of runners, either something you've experienced yourself or someone else in your club or team or some other running buddy of yours, or just the kind of story that makes you wary of becoming a runner at all. And this story is about an avid runner and triathlete named Isabel. That's actually her real name. She's given me permission to tell her story. And in 2010, she developed iliotibial band syndrome, IT band syndrome. And it's a fairly common running injury that involves pain on the outside of the knee. And she was training for an Ironman at the time. She went to physical therapy. She backed off her training. She had her, I don't even think they did emotion analysis, but they just evaluated her strength and flexibility and determined that she was weak on the left side and gave her strengthening exercises to do, which she diligently did. And she felt better and she went back to training and the IT band syndrome came back. And she went back to physical therapy and was reevaluated, got some new exercises, though she had never stopped doing the previous set of exercises. Started doing the new exercises, improved, went back to training, the IT band syndrome came back. 7 times she went through this cycle. And she, at some point in great frustration, asked the physical therapists, why is this happening to me? And honestly, they said, we don't know, because they were doing their very best with their training, which was considerable, and their knowledge of the research and the protocols for treating IT band syndrome, things that sometimes do work for runners, have worked for runners in the past, not working for Isabel. And that was real crossroads for her, whether she was going to be able to continue with the sports that she loved. Now, she was actually able to find a solution, I'm happy to say. And because this is the Feldenkrais Summit, it may not surprise you to hear that it had something to do with the Feldenkrais method. And I'm going to tell you about that, but in order for it to make sense, we need to first look at what she was doing, why the physical therapy and resting did not work for her. And so here's the situation. So as I said, this kind of story may sound familiar to you, maybe painfully familiar. Either to have the same injury recur after therapy and or rest, or to have something else come up, to have a portion of every year you can run, you can train, and every year something happens. You do seem to get better when you get physical therapy or you rest, but then it's the running, when you go back to running or when you go up to a certain threshold, like for a lot of people, it's hitting that distance of 6 or 7 miles, all of a sudden problems will come back. And that's where the key to solving this problem lies, because the problem is that the current therapeutic model reverses cause and effect, right? So the therapists assume that you're stressing your body because specific muscles that are supposed to be used for running are too weak or tight to work properly, and so you run wrong as a result. And that creates stress in your body, and then you get injured or you have pain. But in fact, before you started running at all, most or all of the muscles that you needed for running were weak. Maybe that was in childhood, maybe you've been running continuously through your life, or maybe you, like a lot of runners, started running at some point after age 20. And initially it was hard, but then gradually you got stronger and fitter for running. So the more fit, the better adapted you got to running, the stronger your running muscles, so to speak, got as a result of how you were moving. Running strengthens the muscles that you use for running. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? That's how it works. And so if some of the muscles that you need for running aren't strong, it's because the way you're running hasn't been using them. So in other words, the way that you run isn't a result of your strength. Your strength is a result of the way that you run. Movement comes before strength and produces strength, not the other way around. Now, if you get injured, you go to a physical therapist who does an evaluation and finds that some muscles are weak. It still doesn't necessarily mean that after you strengthen those muscles, you'll run in a way that uses them, because you may not know how to run that way. You probably don't, or they wouldn't have been weak to begin with. And so your problems never resolve fully. And that might mean that you get the same injury over and over, or again, you get this sort of roaming injury phenomenon, but you never get a full solution and the kind of long period of running health that you'd really like, or a full return to running health where you feel like you don't have to be constantly foam rolling or tending or icing things or tending to your body.
So Jae, I'd just like to let people know that at the end, there will be a time for them to ask questions to you, and they can start putting their questions into the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to them at the end. One thing I'd like you to know is we are going to ask you to ask your questions live on camera, so we will get to see your face at that point. So please be ready. If you want to ask a question, please be ready for your camera and your sound to go live for us. And so go ahead, Jae, take us into a little tour of what running can be.
Yes. So, and let me say, I'm really looking forward to your questions. For me, that's the funnest part of this sort of thing. So anyway, so then if you are stuck in a cycle like this, or even if it's not injury, but it's just a cycle of frustration, trying to get your BQ or a PR that you've been chasing after, or even just a distance that you'd like to run, or a way that you'd like to feel. The most important question is, how should you be moving? And this is a question that fortunately, a lot of people take seriously now. When I started working with runners in 2003, before the book Born to Run was written, and running technique became an accepted thing to work on, this was a question that people very rarely asked. So what should your running form or technique, for me, those are interchangeable words, what should that be? And then following up from that question, if your form has problems, is off in some way, and strengthening or stretching, as I've just explained, won't really change things, then how do you improve your form? And so let's look at these. So it's a what problem? What is the right way to run within personal variation? And how do you get there? And so let's look first at the what. So I had to solve these problems for myself as well. I was a professional dancer. I took up running. It felt horrendous. And I was also studying the Feldenkrais method at that time, trained to become a practitioner. And I had to figure out for myself how to make running feel good and how to keep myself from getting hurt doing it. And so I looked at the literature. I looked at everything that I could find that had been written about running technique at that point. And I did a lot of Feldenkrais lessons. And my guiding principle was a principle that I had learned from studying the Feldenkrais method. And that was that better coordinated movement is easier, not harder, than worse coordinated movement, than all the other alternatives. And this is key for runners who are using a lot of strength and discipline to try to improve their form. And unfortunately, that's a very popular idea, that getting better running form requires more strength. You have to do special strengthening. It takes a lot of discipline. All of that is wrong. Coordination feels easier. And right away, not later when you're strong. Because if you had to get stronger to do it, it wasn't easier, right? So fortunately, I knew that principle. I used it as my guide for what changes made my running feel easier. And then I caught on to a few things and founded the Balanced Runner, and have tested out these ideas and learned from giving lessons to over 1,000 runners to date, And what I have are, I call the balance points. They're a bit different from the conventional wisdom on running form. And I would like to show you what they are. So I'm going to share my screen with you now.
Great.
All right. Is everybody seeing a slide that says how to become a balanced runner?
Yes, that's what looks great.
Great. All right. So the key thing to know here is that a healthy gait cycle is woven from a web of relationships involving your whole body. So oftentimes when you see an article about running technique in Runner's World or active.com or competitor.com, something like that, you'll see a laundry list of things that you're supposed to do, things you're supposed to do with your arms, your core, your legs, your foot strike has been a real focus for the last number of years. And they're hard to keep in your mind all at once. And when you get one going, another one stops happening. It's like one of those games where you're trying to get all the marbles in the holes at once. And every time you get one in, another falls out, right? That's a sign that there's something wrong with the list. So running is a single whole body action. And it's a web of relationships through your body. And so I've identified 6 points that tend to bring the whole set of relationships into better balance. So it's kind of the opposite of a laundry list. And I call these, therefore, the balance points. And we're going to look at a picture of Oliver Hensler, who used to work with me in my New York City office. He's donated his image to this project. So 2 of them are that you should lean forward from the ankles. So you could draw a diagonal line from the ankle of the foot that's on the ground up through the front of the top of Oliver's head. It's a forward sloping line, a forward lean. And at the same time, your head should be upright, moving your face forward. So with the exception of Oliver's hand in this moment, his face is really the foremost thing. The face leads the way in running. And this is, it's important to understand the difference between how this works in running and how this works in standing and walking and sitting and the kinds of situations where we work on our posture, right? So if you're standing, you're trying to have your head be in line with your spine. But if you're running and your spine is on a forward angle and you keep your head in line with your spine, then you'll be looking downwards towards the ground. And that's not great for running. It doesn't let you see where you're going particularly well. It doesn't let you look around. So instead, you slide your skull on the top vertebra of your spine to bring your head up so that you can look forward. Or if you're playing soccer or doing something else more complicated that involves running, you're free to look around. That is a crucial element that no one talks about. Next balance point is to feel your core in action. So if you look at Oliver's jacket here, you'll see that there are wrinkles that meet on his right side, kind of under his elbow, which show that his torso is twisting. So there's a lot of emphasis on core stability nowadays, and people mean different things by core stability, but a lot of people mean or interpret that to mean that you should hold your torso as still as possible. But that's actually not possible in a situation where we have 2 legs, neither one is in the middle, and you have to shift your weight from leg to leg. And so in fact, your trunk needs to move. It needs to perform a sort of a twisting action that I call core action, to give you an alternative to core stability. And you can see that we can see Oliver's upper back from shoulder to shoulder. It's turned somewhat towards us, whereas his pelvis is turned somewhat the other way. It's not massive, but it's critical. And then the next 2 are to land with a supple leg and to align your foot below your hip in mid-stance. Now, this slide kind of strikes a balance between those 2 moments of the gait cycle because they're not the same. You want your leg to be supple at the first moment that your foot meets the ground. without obsessing over what part of your foot exactly meets the ground, because that's variable and difficult to control. You want to have a leg that's not straight, because you're coming down from being in the air and your leg needs to load like a spring. It is in fact a spring in running. And so it has to be able to flex immediately without delay. And any delay, any stiffness in the leg is going to create an excessive braking force that slows you down, that you feel is a jolt. That's the pounding that people talk about in running, is excessive braking force. And if you're running well, it doesn't feel like a pounding at all, because your legs are flexible, along with your core, which due to your core action is also flexible and is part of your spring system. And so here Oliver is just a tiny fraction of a second, and I mean that literally, a tiny fraction of a second past foot strike, but you can see his whole foot is not yet on the ground and his knee is bent, and it was bent at foot strike. And now mid stance is a moment after. Mid stance is the moment when you're really on your foot. So in running, you're in the air and then you come down and you're on your foot. Your head is at its lowest point when your weight is fully on that foot. And that moment in the gait cycle is called mid stance. And in mid stance, you need your foot, your ankle, to be right below your hip joint. So basically your foot right below your pelvis, because there's up to 2.5 times your body weight pressing downward at that moment. And so your alignment is really important, that your foot be really centrally placed so that your leg can support and benefit from that pressure, and have that be, again, this loading of the spring, that you're going to get that energy back moment later as the spring recoils and springs open again. So if your pelvis is a little bit behind your foot, you have to use your quadriceps on the front of your thigh very strongly to keep from being pushed down to sit on the ground. And after a while, that becomes very irritating to your knees. It also makes running a lot harder and a lot slower. So this is a really critical moment because of the forces involved. Foot below your hip in mid stance. So Oliver, again, is not there yet, but he will be a moment after this slide. And then the final balance point is to bring your hands close to your heart. And that includes a number of elements. So you'll see Oliver's hand is coming almost to his zipper. Of course, his zipper has turned away from the hand because of the core action. His elbows are bent at a more acute angle than 90 degrees, and that's really important. 90-degree angles at the elbows is such a common piece of running form advice, but it's actually the hardest alignment for your biceps. It's the most work, and it keeps your hands too far from your body, which messes up the way your legs work, and means that the previous two balance points, the supple leg and the foot below the hip at mid stance, are going to be a struggle. So elbow bent at acute angle, hand coming towards the midline, and hand also very close to the chest. So this picture is from the front, so you can't see that Oliver's hand is practically brushing his shirt, but it is. And when you watch world-class East African runners in particular, you'll see that they all have exactly this kind of arm swing. Which is the sort of thing that makes me wonder why experts recommend anything else. But that's just one of those mysteries about expertise. So those are the balance points. And for a lot of runners, you'll have maybe one or two that come naturally to you, and then others that are not happening by themselves. And so I don't recommend that you try and force these things to happen, because if they're not happening naturally, something else needs to change. And if you push it, then you do risk injury. If you force even the right movements, you risk injury. And that gets me into the how. For a very long time, for generations, it was thought that trying to change your running technique was risky and unadvisable and would lead to injury. And everyone was born with a natural way of running, and you shouldn't try and change that. course, no one's born with a way of running. We can't even walk when we're born. It takes a while. We actually learn how to run. And so safely changing and improving your running technique is a matter of learning in an effective way how to run better. And so I'm going to share my screen again and show you my encapsulation of how that works. So it used to be that this was the approach that people took to trying to improve their running technique when they did. So hopefully you're seeing a slide. Maybe Cynthia, you can give me a thumbs up just so I know that
it looks great.
Old school approach, great.
I love that woman.
Yeah, I know. So actually, a lot of people still try to use this method to improve their running form. And there are basically 6 elements. First, you focus on the correct way to run. Of course, this assumes that you're right about what's correct and that you're able to understand it well enough to focus on it. Generally, if you can't do it, you also don't understand it well enough, but that's the problem with number 1. Number 2, fix anything that's wrong. Well, again, as I explained, it's a web of relationships. You can't just fix one thing. You need to improve how the whole system is working. So that's going to be an exercise in frustration at the very best. Number 3, stretch, strengthen, drill, and push. So these are the main tools. You stretch what's weak, and strengthen what, stretch what's tight and strengthen what's weak. I've already explained that doesn't work. You drill the correct movements over and over again, and you push to make things happen. And that is going to be uncomfortable and ineffective because you can't drill a movement that you don't know how to do. What would you be drilling? A faulty movement. If it doesn't come naturally, there's something wrong in the web of relationships. And then, right, stretching and strengthening miss the point completely. Perfect practice makes perfect. That is an oxymoron if ever there was one. If you could practice perfectly, you wouldn't need to practice because you would already be running with great technique. So I don't think we need to spend even too much time taking that seriously. Master each step before proceeding to the next. Now, people who know something about the learning process, and not only movement learning, but any kind of learning, a teacher of anything, knows that the learning process is seldom orderly. That there's a lot of forward and backward. And it is exactly that. It's a process, and things don't come together in their own time. It's not a series of graded steps. And finally, you can only improve if you keep focused on your goals, which means tuning out what's here and tuning into this vision of your head in the future, which may or may not even be correct. So this doesn't work very well. And it's no surprise that people got injured and still get injured trying to improve their running form this way. And so here are the alternatives that, as a Feldenkrais practitioner, I know work better because they're built into the Feldenkrais method of movement education. So this is what you need to truly learn. Instead of focusing on the correct way to run, you instead need to tune into your body. You need to start by experiencing what you're doing. So Moshe Feldenkrais used to say, when you know what you're doing, you can do what you want. Mm-hmm. If you don't know what you're doing, how would you know what to change? So number 2, instead of fixing anything that's wrong, so you're tuning into your body with awareness and with acceptance. So don't start by trying to change. Your assumptions about what's going wrong might be wrong, right? Just try and feel what you're doing. This is where every Feldenkrais lesson begins. Feel what you're doing and don't try to change it. Mm-hmm. Instead of stretching, strengthening, drilling, and pushing, use your imagination if you can't get past a problem. If there's a difficulty that is present and you don't know how to resolve it. Perfect practice makes perfect. Instead, you need variety. Variety opens the door to learning. whereas repetition just makes you into a machine. It's not even how your brain works. Master each step before proceeding to the next. Instead, as a runner, you want to build versatility. The runners who look the most consistent are the ones who are actually so versatile that they can adjust their movement to meet the new needs of each step. The change in the wind, the change in the terrain, the change in the speed, the change in the psychology. And so great running technique is built out of versatility. And finally, instead of keeping focused on your goals, being willing to explore the unknown. Because if you want to run better than you know how, then you need to be moving into a zone that is unknown to you. And you will feel at sea. Everyone feels at sea, at least at some point, and often at many points through a Feldenkrais lesson. And it's only by willingness to do that that you can make the discoveries that bring better movement and function together for you at the end. And so that's the model, both within your running and within your learning process, to really transform your technique and have running feel the way that you know in your heart it can feel. I've never ever met a runner who hasn't had at least one perfect run that they remember from their childhood, or maybe more recently, or maybe just in a dream where there was no effort, there was no struggle, and they felt like they were flying. And it's not a fantasy, and it's not a fluke. It can be your normal way of running, give or take. And it's ancestral memory. It's our ancestral inheritance, our biological inheritance. It's built into our bodies to run that way. And it's just a matter, if that's not how you're running now, it's just a matter of learning how. And that brings me back to Isabel.
Jae?
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to turn your speaker down just a hair. We're starting to get feedback.
Okay, let me do that right away.
Just take your time.
Is that better?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
I think my voice rises the more excited I get. I always get excited.
Excitement's a good thing.
So Isabel, after 7 cycles of injury and physical therapy, finally stopped doing the strengthening exercises, which didn't change how she moved, and which were also, frankly, predicated on a mistaken understanding of how running works, something that didn't match up with the balance points that I just showed you. And instead, she engaged in the exploratory, experimental, sensory learning process that I've described by doing Feldenkrais lessons. And specifically in Isabel's case, she did the online running technique camp that I offer. And she finally got better for good. And in fact, she went back to competing. She went back to triathlon. And in Boston, a couple of weeks ago, she set a new personal best in the horrible weather. So it was in this particular Boston Marathon, the weather was so bad. It was a triumph to finish, to set a PB or PR, depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on, is really remarkable. And I want to emphasize it's not completely magic. So Isabel will probably get some sort of injury again, or at least have the occasional niggle, but it won't be too bad. And will often self-correct, because that's the benefits of having gone through this kind of learning process. And if she does get really hurt, she'll get better much quicker. She has what I call injury resilience. And that is a realistic thing to expect. That's something that every runner should have.
But that is a fabulous statement right there. That's just so important, that little bit. And that's one of the themes, of course, of the summit is resilience, and to have running resilience. I mean, what a great thing, instead of somebody feeling like they're in that continual injury cycle. Right.
And then dependent upon physical therapists, or constantly having to rest, or that these things just happen and there's nothing you can do, you know? So I realize this is a lot of talk, and it probably all sounds great. If you haven't, however, tried this sort of thing, I can offer you a taste of what I'm talking about because I have a free 1-week challenge called the Mind Your Running Challenge.
Mm-hmm.
10-minute lessons, 7 lessons, and it'll give you a taste of this kind of learning as opposed to doing things with strength, stretching, and rest. And so I'd like to invite you to do that, and the link to that is on my speaker page. That is my presentation, and I am very excited now for questions. Cynthia?
Yeah. So, I definitely want to just highlight a couple things that I thought were really helpful out of that. And a couple of them was this idea that you have to strengthen the core, which just, of course, comes up over and over again. And I'm not saying one does not need a strong core, but I love how you had that picture of Oliver, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
You see that beautiful counter rotation. So his hip is coming forward, his leg is starting to swing forward as his shoulder is going back. And so we know if you were to hold that stiff, then the potential of getting the spring action for going forward would be really difficult. And I can't even, certainly we can imagine the impact on breathing to hold that stiff as well. And when you're really needing to take in exchange a lot of air rapidly.
Right.
And I loved your imagination and versatility piece as a different way of thinking as part of your 6 steps. That reframe is really, really good. One thing that I still hear quite a lot of, and I know it's not as popular as it was even 2 years ago, but it's still pretty popular, which is, what's the right shoe? Should I be using a minimalist shoe? Should I be running barefoot? I mean, what are your ideas about that?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a really great question. Fortunately, to some extent, we have moved away from the idea that the shoe is going to fix the problem. There's still plenty of people selling you shoes who will say that. So we evolved to run. Mm-hmm. It's something that humans do. There's strong evidence that it was critical to our evolution to be able to do distance running. So there's nothing wrong with our structure. There's nothing wrong with our capacity. Mm. And so you'd want a shoe that wasn't going to interfere with how your body is meant to work. And unfortunately, the conventional running shoes have elements that always interfere. And so the American College of Sports Medicine reviewed all of the research on running shoes, running gait, barefoot running, and injuries. And they issued new guidelines in 2014 for running shoes. And those are the guidelines that I recommend that everybody follow. And they are that no runner should be running in shoes with motion control or stability components, that a shoe complements a strong foot, and that you shouldn't look to your shoe to solve a problem like that. You should, they say do strengthening exercises, but we can go that much better than that with movement education to solve the movement problems. Right. So that's A. B, there should not be more than 6 millimeters height difference between the heel and the toe. So conventional running shoes can have up to 12 millimeters. That's a high-heeled shoe, basically. Your foot does not work right in that kind of situation. Completely flat, which is called zero drop, is ideal because our feet are zero drop. That's how the body is made to work. But if you need a little bit of a drop, especially if you're making a change from higher heeled shoes, or if you wear high heeled shoes in your daily life, then it would be too much to ask of your body to try and run in completely flat shoes. That's too much change. Then you need a little bit of a lift. It shouldn't be more than 6 millimeters. Shoes should also be lightweight. And oddly not in their bullet points, but elsewhere in the text about it, they say that they should have a wide toe box. And that's also critical, that it should be a foot-shaped shoe where the area for the toes is wider than the area for the ball of the foot is wider than the heel. Most running shoes are pointy and squeeze the toes together, and that really messes up your form. So I recommend that you follow that advice. And barefoot running is pretty awesome. I do it myself, but
do you?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Nobody has to do that if they don't want to.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of options. I mean, the nice thing now is the explosion of available minimalist shoes. It's phenomenal. And even ones that if you need a little segue into using, you can start to graduate yourself out of things that are so highly motion controlled to ones that are much less. So that's great. Another thing that I was wondering about was, do you feel like then, and you said that your body is meant to run, but I mean, it does still seem like there's an awful lot of injuries among runners. And are you thinking that that is really just poor form then?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and even stepping back from the sort of running centric way of thinking about, we can, as Feldenkrais practitioners, even we can say it's a more general thing. It's bringing unsuitable movement habits with you into running. Modern life has pretty much put most of us in the situation of actually cultivating movement habits that are incompatible with running. Yeah. And especially the amount of time we sit. And then also of huge concern, the very limited amount of free and exploratory physical play that we're allowed to do in childhood. And, how increasingly rare it is to see kids be barefoot. And all of that is preparation, all of that helps build the movement habits that help us spontaneously be able to run in a natural and healthy way. And still, if you think of a child running, that's that might be the only running children might be the only people really looking comfortable running that you see in any given year. Yeah. So, chairs are the worst. Computers are pretty darn bad. And so for those of us who still need to be in those kinds of situations, then the art becomes learning to know what's needed for running and what's needed for sitting at a computer. And when you get up to run, you stop doing the stuff that's needed for sitting at a computer and you change the way you organize yourself.
Yeah. I think that's not a simple thing. All of us have the predominant way that we live our lives or the thing that we most value. So if we most value tango dancing, for example, we will often take the way we tango and suddenly make it the way we walk around in the world all the time. Or if you're a Tai Chi player, you might do the same thing. And for those of us who spend a lot of time at a computer, why not? We would end up doing the same thing. Right. Exactly. So that totally makes sense. So we're going to get ready here to take live questions and answers. Those of you who have asked a question, just be aware that your image is going to be used. You're releasing your rights to your image to be used here in our videos. And David, I would love to make you live here in a moment. So David Warden, if you would get ready for that. While David's preparing, just in case he's not ready, I would like to point out that we have been placing links in the chat to all of Jae's fabulous programs. She does have the 1-week program coming up soon called Mind Your Running Challenge, which is completely free that you can sign up for. And also she has the Balanced Runner System online camp that's opening for registration on May 21st. Now, if you're not live with us on Zoom and you can't read the chat, you can find that on the feldenkrais.summit.com page. You just click on Jae's name and you will find those links towards the bottom of the page. That's kind of your home base to find all the links that you need. So I'm going to go over here and find David and make you live, David. Okay. And you're going to be joining us here on video. Wonderful. And let's see me unmute you, David. There we go. I think I've got you. Yeah. David, what's your question?
Yeah, good morning or good afternoon in my case. Thank you for the presentation. That was really interesting. I'm not a runner. I love playing sports, but running is something I've always hated. I don't like it. I find it very difficult. I try to do a little bit of jogging. I walk a lot. But I was just wondering how your points you talked about today reflect in terms of jogging, perhaps, or obviously maybe going back as far as walking. This you talked about.
Yeah, well, so they apply to running at all speeds, including what you'd call jogging.
Okay.
And a few of them are the same in walking. I've said a few. No, but actually only one of them is the same in walking, and that is the core action.
Okay.
Which is equally important to a really smooth, fluid, enjoyable walking, that you could do all day.
Yeah.
Everything else, walking is upright, whereas you lean forward for running. Or optimally, you would lean forward for running. In walking, your arms are long, flexible but long, as opposed to hands close to the heart for running. In walking, your height is reversed. So in walking, you never have this moment when you're in the air all the time, the way you do in the air with neither foot on the ground, the way you do in running. In walking, you always have 1 or 2 feet on the ground. And so you're at your highest in mid stance and you're on a straight leg instead of being on a bent leg. And you use your legs not like springs, but like a pole vaulter's pole. So you put a fairly straight leg down in front of you, and then you lever yourself up on top of it, and then you fall down off of it again. Step. So that's the difference between walking and running. And understanding those differences is critical. And funny thing is, a lot of runners, especially say ultramarathoners, people who go really long distances, often don't have a very good grip on how to walk. They feel more comfortable running than walking. So it's really important to be able to choose either gait at any moment that you would like to be doing that gait, and make a real switch. So for you, it may be that sometimes the problem is just the idea that you have about the thing you're trying to do, and sometimes the problem is more deeply your movement habits.
Yes. Okay, so I mean, I've been doing quite a bit of AY recently with the AY day thing, and we've done quite a bit of stuff on walking, and my walking gait seems to have changed over the last week or so, which is quite interesting. So I haven't tried going into jogging or running yet, and something I might have a little think about. Reading Jack Heggie's book, and he was using the idea of running, but also the same things apply to walking, some of the ATMs in there, but maybe after your presentation, that might not be quite entirely true.
Yeah, in my experience, if you're a Feldenkrais practitioner and you can just pick up a Feldenkrais lesson and do it, or you're looking for lessons to do with runners, practically every lesson that is good for walking is good for running, and vice versa.
Yeah.
But the person will apply what they learned in a context-sensitive way, depending on whether they're aiming to run or walk. So that may sound funny to someone who's not familiar with the Feldenkrais method, but that's just the nature of the learning. So then it just depends what you set yourself to go and do. And when I was first working things out, I would do a lesson and then I would immediately go for a run afterwards, or I would do a run as a scan, which is how I work now. That if you're aiming to improve your running, then run for a few minutes and see what you notice before you do a Feldenkrais lesson, then do the lesson, and then run again and see what's changed.
Okay. Cool.
And I'd just like to add something there for people who have no idea what AY is. David was referring to a set of lessons done by Moshe Feldenkrais called his Alexander Yanai lessons. And those of us who are in the inner circle just shorten that to AY. So, but you can do versions of the AY lessons with your local Feldenkrais practitioner, or signing up with online courses like Jae is going to be offering. I'm sure she blends Feldenkrais quite heavily into, certainly sounds like it, quite heavily into their explorations. And David, I'm going to take you off now and get ready to take a question from Lindsay if Lindsay starts to get ready. You want to say anything more about that, Jae?
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to say that actually I use the Balanced Runner System online running technique camp uses Feldenkrais lessons. So they're audio lessons. You'll do a lot of lessons in a carefully structured sequence that I've tested out for the 15 years that I've been doing this. Then there's all sorts of supporting material, webinars that go much more into depth on running technique and footwear and recovery, all kinds of other topics. But it's a Feldenkrais. It's a Feldenkrais undertaking. So
great. Okay, Lindsay, I'm going to promote you here so we can see you. And you'll be popping up on our screen here in a moment. Yeah. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Lindsay.
Let's see. Are you able to talk? Not yet. Let me figure that out. Okay, I got it.
All right. I can't see you anymore. Is that okay?
That's okay. We've got you.
Okay. Hi, Jay. Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is, I'm assuming that runners have a strong self-image and their past experience as far as style, mechanics, beliefs in what good running is. And how do you connect with them to sort of meet them where they are and then move them to more way in which you're exploring with runners now?
It's a good question. I mean, yeah, well, the funny thing is, so I work with distance runners and not with sprinters. I've had the occasional sprinter client, but it's pretty rare because sprinting is a really different sport. And the thing is, the distance runners tend to actually not have a very strong self-image, because the essence of the sport for a lot of runners can be to tune yourself out, to tune out your sensations. And because running is built into our structure, you can run on sort of autopilot. I mean, there are a lot of systems that will operate really without a whole lot of motor control at all. And so beginning to even engage with okay, so for people who are not Feldenkrais, this is another great in-depth question from a Feldenkrais practitioner, obviously. And so this all may not make a whole lot of sense to you if you're not a Feldenkrais practitioner. But chances are, if you're a runner, you don't have a very good idea. You would have some difficulty picturing how you run, or lying down and imagining and remembering the feeling of running would be hard to summon. You might remember things you saw on a run, or you could certainly remember something that hurt, but remembering the feeling of running and having a sense of your body and an ability to make choices, those may not feel like they're really there for you. For the occasional runner, they are. In my limited experience with sprinters, they have a very strong ability to do that. And I think that's because a second is a lifetime to a sprinter, you know, because the nervous system has to be so attuned to operate on that time frame. But for distance runners, it's the opposite. And so we go slowly. So we go slowly and make simple distinctions that let people build their image or their map of themselves the way all maps are made, by exploration, by a simple, safe step to find out something new every day and add to your map. And so that it doesn't need to seem like an overwhelming task, and so that you don't need to feel like you need to step back away from your sport and into something weird. But in fact, you're always improving your sport, but you're improving the most powerful tool that a runner has, which is the ability to feel what you're doing, not just look at the video afterwards, and make choices. I have there's a runner named Melody Fairchild who I keep forgetting what method she plays. She's trained in a related method to the Feldenkrais method, but also involves a component of energy work. I can't remember what it's called, but Melody set the high school girls 2-mile record that stood until she's my age. She's in her late 40s. She set the high school girls 2-mile record, American record, and it stood until just a couple of years ago. And then later on as a master's runner, she really kicked butt. And she has always said that as a master's runner, after going through a learning experience like the Feldenkrais method, is when things finally came together for her, and when she began to be able to make better informed decisions about, say, when to kick in a race, when to pull back. You know, that the fuel management questions that are the essence of the sport. She just knew the answers to those better than she ever had before. So I digressed a little bit from your question there, but that's more what that terrain looks like, if that's useful to you.
Thank you. Yes, it was. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah. So a couple more questions that I actually have is, you addressed this a little bit, which is one of the things that we've heard a lot about is foot strike and or weight acceptance, maybe somewhere in between those two. It seems like there's some people are talking about foot strike, some people are talking about the moment of weight acceptance, but there's been a lot of variation from heel to ball. And I heard you say earlier, that's really hard to control. So I'm curious about what your thoughts are about the ideal place for foot strike.
Right. Well, the key thing is that A, it's variable, and B, it's an outcome, not an input. So, trying to intentionally change your foot strike is like trying to change the tires on a moving car. You really can't do it. And if you try, it's dangerous. And I do mean that. Right. So there was a lot of research about, how a stiff leg, back of the heel strike creates an excessive braking force that can be really damaging to your knee and your back, and was presumably correlated with running injuries and certainly with running misery and lower performance. And that habitual barefoot runners land on their forefoot, and testing shows that they don't get that jolt and often stay healthier. And so that would be a better way to run. And so this led to an epidemic of people trying to put the front of their foot on the ground first instead of the heel on the ground without changing anything else, and getting really bad Achilles tendon problems as a result. So where your foot lands, where and how it has to land to keep you from falling over. And so you need to change everything else about what you're doing in your body, and the foot strike will regulate accordingly. And so in Feldenkrais parlance, it's an outcome of the balance between your flexor and extensor muscles throughout your body. And if those are in balance, then you'll land on average with a moderate midfoot strike. So some people bristle at that terminology, but basically what that means is around the base of the head of around the head, just below the head of your fourth or fifth metatarsals on the outside of the foot, right? But not with the heel lifted high in the air, with the heel very close to the ground and coming down to kiss the ground before you take off again. That on average is an optimal foot strike. If you're in running shoes, that's going to feel like just landing with a flat foot. You won't, because your sensation, you won't be able to feel quite as clearly what you're doing because of the cushion. If you're barefoot, it'll be crystal clear to you how you're landing. It's one of the great things about barefoot running. In my experience, an exaggerated forefoot strike is as bad or worse as an exaggerated heel strike. If your leg is supple, you won't have an exaggerated heel strike. And if you do Feldenkrais lessons that improve your core action, that's going to regulate the tonus throughout your body and how your weight is balanced in gravity, so that you get this moderate midfoot strike most of the time on flat ground.
Good, helpful, very helpful. I think Stephen Wiltschang, Stephen or Stefan, I've never asked you how you said your name, so we'll let you inform me here, but let me find you and bring you up. So Stefan, I think it's probably Stefan.
Wiltschang.
Let me get you off of mute. So I'm going to learn how to do this maybe by the end of this one. We practice many dry runs, but there's some things you can't practice till you actually have an audience.
It's the truth.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you, Jay. Greetings from Malmö in Sweden. My name is Stefan Wilcznik, actually.
Wilcznik. I really
it's a Slavonic name in a German transliteration, so it's not easy for English speakers, I suppose. Well, Jay, thank you for your very interesting presentation and the conversation following that. I want actually to speak out with a twofold invitation to all the participants of the summit to actually continue this conversation here in another forum after the live stream is gone. I've proposed to Cynthia a couple of days ago the possibility to create a Facebook environment that we set up together with Cynthia. And I would just like to invite you to, if you want to continue to talk or chat at least with one another, to continue the conversation there. And the second invitation related to that is actually considering creating small shared viewing events locally with your colleagues and friends to maybe complement this amazing online experience with a little bit of online or offline or on-site personal interaction. And we're trying to kind of make those events visible in this Facebook group as well. So that's the little bit of advertisement and invitation to continue the conversation. And maybe Jae, you would want to pop by and maybe answer some questions that might come up or not as synchronously as your time allows. Thanks for that.
Stefan, how would they find that? What's the name?
Well, I guess I'm going to post the Facebook link in the chat if I manage to do that immediately.
That's beautiful. And then I think that if people are not on Zoom, they're actually watching the live stream, they can find it by querying Feldenkrais Awareness Summit Global. Is it Global Hub?
Well, the thing is, there's an easy link, actually. If you are on Facebook and go facebook.com/groups/Feldenkrais Summit, as in one word and one in one go, you should directly be able to reach the group. There are 3 little questions to be answered before I approve you together with my fellow admin colleagues. But that shouldn't be a big hurdle, I guess, if you're interested in joining the conversation afterwards.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thanks for now. All the best.
Thanks. So that's great. I'd be very happy to stop by and discuss with anyone who wants to and answer questions. Great idea.
Well, I just want to remind you that Jae has a free Mind Your Running challenge coming up. So again, you can find that in the links either on her speaker page at www.feldenkreissummit.com or in the chat here, and that she also has an online camp opening up on May 21st. And it's been a pleasure to have you today, Jae.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this. It is really a great honor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And so I'd like to say this is Cynthia Allen, and I'm going to be signing out here for our very first session. Thank you so much for joining us. Just remember that we have sessions that stream, the next one at 12:30. So every day, 8 a.m., 12:30 p.m., and 8 p.m. EDT, EST time. And we hope you'll be able to join us for the next session. The recording of this session will be up in about an hour to 2 hours and remain accessible for 24 hours if you have registered. You can also purchase the entire series with unlimited access to each recording, along with an audio download and over $200 worth. I think it's more like $300 at this point because people have continued to add items, bonus Feldenkrais awareness through movement lessons. So on behalf of our sponsor, Future Life Now, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you very soon. Goodbye.